Who's paying who?
The city would pay the developer once the main is installed. We've been negotiating for the past 6 to 8 months on this development agreement. The council started this discussion back in October, and we've not been able to come to terms on the development agreement until recently. So the city would pay for the upsizing of that main for future service areas. And our intent would be to recoup most of our costs for that upsizing through future connections made south of 415.
And where does it come from initially?
It will come from the sanitary sewer fund.
Is that money in there now, or is that we have to raise it as we go? Or?
We're using fund balance to pay the developer, and the council approved that payment in the first budget amendment we did for fiscal year 2023 back in November. We did our first budget amendment this year.
Any estimates how long it'll take us to recoup that in future development?
It would depend on how fast the area to the south develops. I mean, part of the area has now been annexed for commercial, or and it's the future land use designates it for commercial and mixed use, so that will help. It is the payment for upsizing is actually written into your code that the developer is not.
I understand. I've had that explained to me several times.
Okay, sorry.
Still don't like it, but there it is.
Well, I know you don't like money out going to developers, and at a high level, I do agree with that. And for me, it's less about recouping the spend here than it is avoiding future redundant work. Like if whether it's 15 years or quite frankly 50 years, we would need to tear up what size would it be? What size are they paying for?
8-inch, and we are asking for it to go to 15-inch.
Right. I mean, that one, it will cost more. Two, it's just anti-productive to redo work that can be done in one fell swoop if we know it's going to happen at some point, and I think every indication is that it will. So, I mean, I don't want to be any more developer friendly than we are. That I agree with you on, and this should be scrutinized. So I'm not telling you to not second guess any of this, but to me, it's can we avoid future work at a cost that's beneficial to us, and if that money goes to whoever, I'm less concerned.
First of all, I'm not second guessing anyone. I like to know what's going on. I ask questions. That's what I've been doing for 30 plus years. And if you can help me understand it, I can probably get behind it.
Well,
but if I can't understand it, I probably won't get behind it, because that's who I am.
If I may, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but we did look at an alternative whereby the sewer to serve the area to the south did not go through this subdivision, and it would go to the west of the subdivision through the core ground. First of all, getting the core easement was going to be a big challenge, and then secondly, the sewer was going to cost more compared to the upsizing. So it actually saves money and allows it to go in now as opposed to trying to spend 2 years to get an easement or whatever it would take. So I apologize, I didn't bring those numbers with me, but it was well over $1 million in probably an outdated cost opinion, so maybe even higher than that yet now.
So this upgraded 15-inch sewer will flow into another 50. So
It'll be continued. As it goes upstream, it'll get smaller and smaller the farther it goes, because you're carrying less flow at the upper ends. This is the lower reach, I guess, if you will, of the sanitary sewer. It will connect to the lift station that's on the other side of the backwaters of the barrier dam. That's where it'll connect to the sewer on Southside Drive and run down to there. And then from there, it'll kind of gradually go upstream as it crosses 415 and serves the area to the south and heads toward Lake Drive. So it'll gradually shrink as the flows shrink. But again, this is large because you're at the bottom end of it.
I do want to mention, I want to clarify this while we're talking about it now. This is step 1 of 2 steps. So this does not get us to fully service the area of 415. This gets us to 415. We still need to either prioritize in future capital improvement plans, how we're going to service south of 415. So it is the first step of 2 steps. Did I explain that well?
It actually stops short of 415 a bit. Just
Okay.
the Johnsons have a property there. The developer has acquired an easement, so we know the city will have the right to extend it. So that would be a future project. We'd look perhaps to a developer on the south side. That is an option.
Did you say they had acquired the easement?
Mhm.
Okay, let's call the roll.
Dvorak,
Yes.
Sarchet,
Yes.
Vogel, Anderson,
Yes.
Walters.
Yes.
Moving on to item 5, public comment period. This is the time and place for comments for any item other than those that are a public hearing. Do we have anyone request to speak?
Yes, sir. Ken Morris.
Okay, come on up, Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome.
My name is Ken Morris, 1308 West Side Drive. I'm here tonight to address you a couple comments regarding proposed ordinance 2023-6000. First off, I apologize for not addressing this on the second reading. I was focused on another item at that, and I was asked whether I had concerns about this ordinance. I hadn't really studied it closely, but I do have. Specifically, the impact of the ordinance on acreages and farms that get annexed into the city limits. When a farmstead gets annexed into the city limits, is it fair that the farmstead be subject to the aesthetic codes of the new developments and this ordinance? Section 1A of the ordinance, as wordy and vague as it is, would subject the existing farmstead or property to the aesthetic characteristics within the development with no regard for the existing aesthetic characteristics of the farm. A couple of cases in point. Up on north side of Hug Drive, there's an old farmstead up there with the windmill. We all know where we're talking about. And she sold off the land for all those properties up there. And she's got a beautiful farm up there with farm buildings. She's got cribs and machine sheds and so forth. And my concern is if a storm came through and wiped out one of her corn cribs, which she uses for storage, or one of her storage buildings, then she would have to build a garage that looks like the new neighborhood. Her farmstead there has its own character, and a new garage that matches the new neighborhood would then detract from the characteristic of the existing farmstead. Out by Prairie Flower, there's a gentleman that's lived there all of his life, sold off some ground and had new neighbors move in all around him. It's outside of Polk City, I know. But as soon as all the new development came in, they all put pressure on him to clean up his farmstead, and he's getting pressure from the county to clean up the farmstead that he's lived on his entire life and sold ground for the new owners to come in. There's numerous properties on South 14th Street and east of the Barrier Dam, Southside Drive. The same thing applies. Go up on 128th Street. There's a real nice farmstead east of town on the north side that isn't annexed in yet. Someday it will be. And as we annex these farmsteads in north of town, with or without their desire to be annexed in, I don't think it's right that we should then tell that person that had that farmstead for years that now they have to have buildings that match the new buildings around them. They've got a farmstead that's got its own character. It may be a century farm in some cases. I think those people have the right to keep their property as it was, when they get developed in and around them. There was it was brought up at the last meeting about covenants covering some of these issues, and the covenants do cover these issues. And when the covenants cover all of these issues in new construction, I don't think that it's right then to enforce those covenant rules on the people that have been there for years prior and possibly even century farms. But those properties that we're going to annex in are farmsteads, have been farmsteads, and shouldn't necessarily be told now they have to look like their new neighbors. If they want to, if their barn is damaged, burns down, blown away, they should be able to build their barn that looks like the agricultural property that they've always had. Aesthetics are subjective, and I don't think that we should legislate what constitutes aesthetic characteristics. And I think that it's a slippery slope of over legislating something that isn't a problem. That ordinance is a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. If we want to have an ordinance that says we don't have metal pole buildings in Polk City, make it just that straightforward. But don't impact the people that were here before us. I'll go one step further to say the whole Lost Lakes development is built on an area that was once deemed to be an eyesore properties to some other people. And people more or less forced them out in order to bring the new development in. And I'm not against new development, but I am against imposing new rules on people that are already there when we develop development. I just think we need to be cautious of that. That's all. Questions? Rob Camp.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
So then we will move on to item 6, consent items, and I'll ask for a motion in a second, please.
So move.
Second.
And call the roll, please.
Vogel? Yes. Anderson?
Yes.
Walters?
Yes.
DeVore? Sarchet?
Yes.
Moving on to business items, number 7 on our agenda. A, second reading of ordinance 2023-8000, consolidating the current U1 to GF zoning districts into a new GF1 zoning district. Kathleen?
Really, the purpose of this kind of came up as we were looking at the zoning of the new city hall community room and zoning that to U1, so it matched this facility. But the U1, the description of that essentially says public utility district. So it really kind of was misleading. It makes it sound like it's substations and that kind of thing, where in fact what you have is a lot of city buildings, city hall, existing community room, just a number of city facilities that are in there. So we felt that the name really needed to be changed to more accurately reflect what the use is. And then the second thing was there was another district that was called GF for government facilities that was created at the request of Corps of Engineers back when that land was annexed. Nothing's ever been zoned that, so we thought we kind of combine them. We went through it by changing the name of the U1 just simply because it's simpler on the zoning map. Zoning map is going to look identical as to what it does now. It doesn't change anything on the map other than change the word U1 to GF. So that was the simplest way to do the map change, is by changing the name of the zoning district and consolidating the two. You'll see some of the uses changed a bit, but again, it's more in line with how the zoning district is actually used, which is for government facilities.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. So we'll ask for a motion in a second and then any council comment.
So moved.
Second.
Anything? Call the roll, please.
Sarchet?
Yes.
Vogel? Yes. Anderson?
Yes.
Walters?
Yes.
DeVore?
Yes.
Item B then is third reading of ordinance 2023-6000, amending chapter 157 site. Kathleen, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'm just going to confirm in here. It doesn't say normal district. So, I guess in clarification response a little bit to what Ken was talking about, just to be clear, those properties would come in as A1 and not R1. So they're zoned agricultural, not R1. So that, just to bear that in mind. In terms of section 1 of the code, all that was really doing was listing districts that already have requirements that we're not changing further in the code with respect to brick. So it just kind of alerts you up front that those districts, for example, have some kind of brick requirement. We're not changing the brick requirement, they're already there. It just kind of lists them under the architectural theme, to anybody who's skimming doesn't read that far and then stop and not recognize that they may have, as a multifamily use, for example, that they would also have those brick requirements. So it kind of sets up the rest of the ordinance and doesn't change it or impose any new requirements. Section 2 does add a requirement that all the exterior of all single-family homes and accessory structures need to be an acceptable material that's already defined in your code. And then, which probably the primary change there would be that vertical metal siding would no longer be considered acceptable for either a home or an accessory structure. It does not specify zoning districts, so you could exempt A1 if that was your intent. And then it allows that up to 30% can be a more of a decorative type. So you could have 30% of the building could be a vertical panel of some type. So it does allow it for some of the building, but not an entire building.
Okay.
Questions now, or do we have to?
Of Kathleen? Well, I think that's okay.
Get a motion on
floor already.
We don't have a motion. Do you want a
I
motion
do a
first?
motion first.
All right, let's,
Can we ask a clarification though, rather than, less of a discussion and more
Sure,
just a
and then-
clarifying point? Because I want to understand, the relation to
Yeah,
Ken's
in
point.
case we need to amend a third.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to be clear. So you're saying that if an agricultural property were annexed,
Mhm.
it would be A1.
Yes,
These specific components here are speaking to are, 1, 2, all of, so
yeah,
essentially it would not pull in A1 until the point at which it was changed.
section 1 would not,
Okay, so
section
section
2
1, section 2.
would.
Okay, thank
Section
you for
2
that
does not have an exemption, it doesn't say except A1. And so if you were wanting to make that distinction for farmsteads, I'm saying you could say except in the A1 district, if that was what you were thinking.
I mean, that makes sense.
And keeping in mind too, that those properties would be grandfathered in, so it's
Right.
not like they'd come in and then they'd all of a
Right.
sudden have to be changed to meet these requirements. They can continue on as they have been until such time as they are, I think, 60% destroyed, and then they would have to meet any requirements at that point in time. So you've got a couple different things going on.
Right.
Not only do they continue to be zoned agricultural until they would choose to request a rezoning, but you also have a grandfathering of those properties that come in terms of how they are constructed, their architectural standards, whatever.
I would feel much more comfortable just exempting A1 from 1A and 2, only because, say there was a derecho. If I took my parents' farm as an example, and it was in the same situation as what Ken mentioned on Hog, maybe 60% was. I mean, I hate providing like somebody else providing a percentage to what the damage was, or I don't like that gray area that could potentially be there. Speaking for myself, of course, but I think probably 60% of their farm was damaged to the point where it would then be like, okay, you have to put this new stuff on now. That doesn't feel right. Doesn't to me personally. I'm just speaking for myself, but I think we should exempt A1 from both of those for the reasons that Ken mentioned. It also, we shouldn't mandate the folks that have been here for those farmsteads that have been here for so long. I don't feel comfortable at all saying what they should or should not do.
Right. Section 1 already doesn't apply, so we don't need to make a change to that, but we could accept certainly in section 2.
Kathleen, we only voluntarily annex, don't we?
Well,
Historically,
Generally-
yes, but that doesn't mean that we won't.
I mean, you could, where I could see it potentially happening is if there's a big property, a lot of property owners and properties that want to annex, but maybe one small one doesn't, can't create an island, so possibly, so I wouldn't say never. You don't have a history certainly of doing that.
Hasn't happened in 31 years.
Right, it's just, like I said, the only thing I can think is if you have
But
a big neighborhood and there's, let's say, 100 people want to come in, they all want to come into the city,
But they
and there's
still-
one property that doesn't, they could block.
and
They'd
once
still
this
come
is on
in
the
as A1.
They would, yeah,
They'd still come in as A1 even if they came in as a non-consenting owner in a voluntary annexation.
So how do you want us to proceed, Amy?
Well-
If we're going to proceed this way, if,
You can amend, I think the question would be.
it's the
what-
third reading.
It is
Don't
the
we
third
have-
reading, it is the third reading. We can, to clarify, you either have two options. You start at the beginning again and go through all three readings, if you choose to do that. I think with a clarification amendment like this would be, because you've already got A1 exempted out of the first portion of this, and you're really clarifying to exempt out of this second portion, then you could approve that additional clarification on your third reading, if you choose to do that. But if you prefer to just be completely transparent and start from the beginning, then you could do that also. I think either work, given the change that is being requested. It's a clarification.
Well,
Um,
you're probably gonna want a motion, because what I'm gonna say is gonna get into a discussion, because there are a few things that I wanna hit based on what you said, Ken. But to me, the headline is that we've gotten away from the original issue that you were trying to, I should single you out, Ron, but that you were the driving force in some of this to bring it up, which is small existing lots having bigger sheds, pole barns, whatever you want to call them, right? And so the original concern that I had with this while voting for the first reading, and I will admit that was guilty on the second reading of the earlier, or the primary ordinance, whatever you want to call it, the second time around, but is the unintended consequence of some of this broader verbiage. I wouldn't probably label it as vague. I think it's well worded. It just has other impacts than what we were intending to focus on. So, again, you want to
So, so shall we ask for a motion and a second on this as it's written, as B is
Well,
written?
if you do that and then does not pass, then the entire ordinance does not pass, because you're on your third read, any read.
So then
But
what would you?
if there's a lack of motion, then it would be like the other one last time where we can revisit it.
Where you could bring it back, well, again, no, it's a little bit different,
Start
because you've got a third reading here,
Third,
so
okay,
if
thank you.
there's no motion, then it's denied.
It might be best just to start over.
I think that's,
Re-
given what I'm hearing, I think
Re-clarify.
that's probably
This
best,
isn't-
and just clarify. Is there any time, I mean, you're not under any time constraint, I assume?
No, but
No.
to Ron's frustration on the first reading is something could get requested tomorrow and we've not addressed the issue. So,
You
but I do have concerns that this actually addresses the issue while maybe causing other ones.
What you can
So-
always do is waive
Yeah,
waive
yeah,
the rules and
just have that 2 weeks
And
between
just
now
have-
and the
yeah,
next
just
meeting,
have the 2
technically.
weeks, you go through the first reading at your next meeting, and then suspend the rules that requires you to have 2 more readings and pass at that same meeting.
So Ken, what I heard in what you said, and again, do you want a motion on
Well, if we take a motion and it doesn't pass, then our discussion is over.
On this particular ordinance.
Right.
That you can still bring back.
Right. But that ends discussion on this tonight,
On this
because we're gonna
tonight.
bring it back.
okay, so I don't want to do that.
When we come,
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
well, why not?
die this one
I
and
want,
then restart.
If we have a motion and it fails, then discussion is over. We're bringing it back at another time. We don't need to discuss it further.
With the
But I wanna
additional
discuss it
changes on the new.
But wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't you have that discussion after this is over? I mean, at another time?
You,
That would be input.
you can't, definitely, but I want to make sure that we're clear in what you're requesting to be brought back.
yes,
So-
that's fair. So,
So if you don't proceed any further with that tonight, if you put a motion forward and no one seconds it, it will die, this particular motion. You then would bring a revised ordinance back at your next meeting.
Right.
But I think we want to make sure it's clear what you want us to bring back. And what I'm hearing is that you just want to exempt agricultural from this new section or no portion of 157.03.
Well. is
I
that
don't
what I'm
know.
hearing- Is that what I'm hearing from the council?
Well, I'm curious what Rob's remaining question,
So I think,
in order to make that determination.
Yeah, I'd say, given where we are, just to make sure we're clear here, because we're going to need to make the changes that you have a discussion, so we know what to bring back.
I'm glad we're making you work for it tonight. This is kind of fun.
That's fine,
So
but I
let's go ahead and proceed then, and with further discussion. So you're all right with that, right? So
I'm
you have-
okay with
so
that,
you
given
have
the
clarification.
circumstances, yes, because we need clarification.
All right, so let's give her clarification.
So what I heard in what you said, there's one piece of it, Ken, that I disagree with. There's one piece that I agree with, and there's one piece that I'm concerned with, and maybe I'm misbucketing it. But I still do agree that I would like to address the true issue that I think was the impetus for this, which is smaller lots in town building big accessory structures and vertical siding. But I am concerned with the verbiage in here having, like I said, other impacts to lots that, whether they get annexed in later or they exist now, I don't really care, because there is, I think, different rules for larger lots. Again, whether they're flat or existing for 100 years. I do think that those likewise need to be addressed, and that's where I know I'm being a little bit vague, but that's not as concerning to me now, because I think the appetite is broader for a little bit of flexibility. But I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ron, we're not completely, this isn't, you brought up the point of overregulation, and I think broader verbiage here may lend itself to that. So what I would ask for is a more specific application to fix the problem that caused this in the first place, which, as I understand it, small, I don't know if we want to set a limit of quarter acre, half acre, something like that, and the siding and the allowable size of those structures. So that's what I would like to see back. I'm not trying to convince anybody else that that's the right thing to do, but where I'm somewhat not sure on is some of the scenarios that you laid out. There has to be some transition, and I do think the city's done a good job managing those to this point, which leads me to believe that maybe we don't need it, or at least we don't have as a pressing of a concern with an ordinance change on those, because you do have to have a driveway. You do have to connect the city sewer. I think we can agree on those, and we've been flexible on those. Where you draw the line is how big of a barn, how much siding, some of those things. And I think there could be some compromise that both addresses the ones that are similar now in town while bringing people in, because you're right, just because in 31 years we've never forcibly annexed doesn't mean a different council 5, 10, 100 years from now could, and with this on the books, it makes that a little bit more problematic. And the last point can probably wait because it's tangential to all this, so if somebody else.
So,
Go ahead.
well, I think where we started this was exempting the A1, and I think that's how, at least initially, there may be additional changes at some point that you need to make to your ordinances.
But I don't think
But
that
for
exempting
these-
A1 doesn't.
But for this particular, to address what we're trying to address now, it may. I mean, we're trying to clarify what's going on. I understand there may be certain other things that you want changed and others want changed in the ordinances, but to address the concerns that were brought up tonight, I think at least for these particular ordinance changes, to exempt A1 at least initially.
So is that
Yes.
what did Sally Jensen's property, which was one that he talked about, and Carlton property that came in with, what's it called? On
Whitetail Ridge.
Whitetail Ridge, what did those come in as?
They would
A1.
come on A1.
A1.
Mhm.
All property is annexed and is A1. The property owner requests then rezoning.
Yeah.
So if they don't request it, it just stays A1.
So
Be the property owner's choice to
Right.
zone it from A1 to something else.
no size factor in there whatsoever.
No.
Not if we add in that exemption.
All property annexed in comes in as A1. That's the first step. The second step then that property owners usually ask for is to have their property then rezoned. So you always have two separate steps when a property comes from the county.
But annexation does not rezoning is not the next step naturally for an annexation.
wouldn't
It's
that-
not required.
Isn't that reverse spots? It's spot zoning by
It-
proxy.
No,
So if you got 30-acre development and there's nothing on there but fields, and there's one house and it's an A, whatever, right?
it'll stay
And you-
A1 unless someone requests it.
But what
be
I'm
rezoned.
saying is if it all comes in as A1 and then every 39 acres gets rezoned to
Not
R1,
Not considered spot zone.
can you talk?
It's open here.
Can I ask a question or no?
that's up to you as the mayor, but generally, you know, once you start down that slope, that's a slippery one, I will say, so.
Yeah.
What?
So, so we had the public comment period.
But
In the
that
interest of-
wasn't public comment, that was comments to an agenda item.
Well,
that
that's
was a
true.
public comment period.
It was the public
I know, but
comment
it was
period.
specific to something that was on the agenda.
Right.
Doesn't it say?
It's
Twenty-
not a
2023.
public hearing though.
That's-
It's specific to 2023, 6,000.
Generally now, the discussion is between council members.
So that's where we are now. Yes, sir.
If we're at the point where we won't allow citizens to ask questions, I don't think we're a very effective council.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I'm happy with that, him asking a question, as long as we can.
Keep it real short.
I don't know if we can legally do it, yeah.
That's
Otherwise-
your rules. That's,
so up to my discretion. All right. Please keep it short.
Very short, just for my own clarification, Amy, A1 is not the same as R1A.
that is correct. They
Now,
are
I'll take
two-
I'll end that question. And then the second thing, you referenced grandfather. I don't see anything written in there that say they're grandfathered in. That would protect what I'm asking.
is a different provision in the code dealing with grandfather.
Okay.
It's not within this section.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Okay. Everybody's happy? Let's,
Far from.
let's,
No, my whole concern is, are we creating more loopholes? Because there are people out there gonna push the envelope. That's what started this to begin. Someone come in and decide to push the envelope. Okay, I can call this a garage and make it whatever I want. We've addressed those items, but that's what started this whole thing. Are we creating more loopholes? Well, I can call this a homestead.
But you can't.
You have to be A1.
Well, I think if it's driven by the zoning of
So-
R1,
Well, an example, we're out on Hug Drive. There's a rental property there that's been there forever. Can he call that a homestead? It just sits there all by alone.
Homestead doesn't change
Homestead
it.
has to
Yeah,
be
homestead
homestead,
doesn't
it's
make
just
any
the zoning.
difference. It would be the zoning classification. So if the zoning continued to be A1, yes, that property would be exempt from that.
I thought you were trying to address the size of whatever you want to call it, shed, pole barn, outhouse, whatever. Like
Mhm.
that, isn't that what we're trying to address?
Yes. But
But let's be clear,
Well-
the size one died. This
Right,
one is specific to architectural siding.
Yeah.
But what I was told in the past was, we gotta make this a citywide ordinance. It can't just be a one-shot deal up in my neighborhood,
Well,
which I wouldn't want anyway.
it's not a one-shot deal. It applies to R1, which is what your neighborhood is. It does not apply to A1, which is what something you come in as.
Well, and we'll go back to, again, voluntary annexation. They all voluntarily annexed. That doesn't mean somebody else won't not want a voluntary annex, another 31 years. But they're doing that to make more money, but yet they still want to have their A1 in the middle of it. Is that a good interpretation?
Which they still can.
Yeah. And we're okay with that.
I am, if I understand what you're saying, is that some of the scenarios
I'm
that
good.
Ken pointed out that were, I'll take it the other way. That's not what we're trying to address. We're trying to address something and leave that scenario alone. And so I'm struggling with, are we addressing that original issue while not breaking something else? But it sounds like we are, because of, it would come in as A1 and therefore be a non-issue.
I do want to reiterate what I said at the last meeting. Most of these requirements are applicable to commercial zoned properties. And we've had that comment made to us in the past from people looking to develop commercial, that we have less restrictive design requirements for some of our residential buildings. So I do just pass that along. We've taken those calls at City Hall. People have pointed to those cases. So I do like the idea of maybe streamlining it a little bit to match more what's in line with our commercial requirements.
And this is an effort to do,
Yes,
you're saying? Okay.
yes.
Okay,
Okay, so we don't have a motion on the floor. You can request a motion, and if it doesn't get a second, then this ordinance in its current form will not go forward. That will allow us to bring forth a new ordinance with the revisions as discussed tonight, specifically exempting A1 from this section 2, is what I'm hearing.
So I would like to make a motion based on the assumption that I think what we've heard is some of your concerns have been addressed. It's also more in line with commercial and most specifically addressing again the original issue for some of the sideways concerns, I'll say, have been allayed, and we're still addressing the original issue. And I had forgotten that you had mentioned the commercial aspect as well, so that I think
Is your motion with the amendment to exempt A1 is the only clarification
that
I
was
need on your
already in.
motion.
right.
It's not in section 2.
We have to add
That's,
the exemption of A1 to section 2 if that's what you're
Okay.
trying to accomplish.
But we can't do that unless the motion fails on this
you can,
one.
I think that's the best way, because that way it'll be clear from your first reading.
Right.
What you're voting on.
Right.
So my suggestion would be a motion to approve the third reading of this ordinance before you, and that doesn't get a second. That's the easiest way to deal with that. This ordinance will then not be taken any further.
So you're saying you recommend motion to approve as is, or letting it
Motion
die,
to-
come back fresh? In
Motion
2
to
weeks?
approve as is, and then there'll be no second to it. That way it will die.
explain that.
And then it can be brought back in a
Because
different form.
because you don't have an approval of the third reading. You're at your third reading of the ordinance.
But wouldn't it be preferable to approve it with the amendment to the second section? Section
You
2?
can do that, but it's,
The perception
I
of
think
that.
it's.
Given all the
cleaner.
debate, it
All
might
the
make
debate,
sense
it's
to
going
just
to be
come back with
cleaner,
it
just
written
bring
way.
it, let us bring it back, let us put that language in, so you have it before you can read it and know what you're voting on. I think that's the cleanest way to do it. You're not under any time constraints here to get it in place. You have the ability to suspend the rules and approve everything at the next meeting, once you have the language in front.
Okay, so let's go down that road. And I'll ask for a motion to approve B, third reading of ordinance 2023-6000.
Thought you already made it.
He didn't. I don't know what
Yeah.
that was.
And if there's no motion, then we will not, if this one dies, we'll bring a new ordinance with just that change back to you at the next meeting.
Right, so I've asked for the motion to approve. Hearing no approval, motion dies. Moving on to C. A motion to Snyder and Associates, March 2023, engineering services invoice in the amount of $43,153.25. Motion to approve, please. Second,
Second.
roll call.
Vogel,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Walters,
Abstain.
Dvorak, Sarchet.
Yes.
So moving on to 8, we have 3 proclamations. I do hereby recognize the week of May 14th through May 20th, 2023 as National Police Week in Polk City, Iowa, and publicly salute the service of law enforcement officers in our community and in communities across the nation. I urge all citizens to recognize these officers' faithful and loyal devotion to their responsibilities, and thank
Jeremy? Thank you.
The second one is, it's appropriate to recognize the value and accomplishments of emergency medical services providers by designating Emergency Medical Services Week. So in recognition of this event, I do hereby proclaim the week of May 21 through May 27, 2023 as Emergency Medical Services Week with the EMS Strong theme, EMS, where emergency care begins. So thank you. And the third proclamation is to designate the week of May 21 through 27, 2023 as National Public Works Week in Polk City. And we all urge all citizens to pay tribute to our public works professionals, engineers, managers, and employees by recognizing the substantial contributions they make to protecting our national health, safety, and quality of life. So thank you to all involved. Moving on then to item 9, reports and particulars. We begin with council.
I have one that's gonna piggyback on very nice to what was just your proclamation above. I received a call this afternoon from a citizen who took a ride with our EMS people last Friday, complimenting them on the job they did and how professional they are and how pleased he was to have those people step forward that provide those services. And I said, we're very lucky we have those people that want to do that. And he said they couldn't have been more professional. Really appreciated his ride and the care he got on that ride. So thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Anyone else on the council? Chelsea, do you have anything?
We are accepting soil quality restoration applications for the city-wide project we will be doing. We'll have some mailers go out in the next week or so, so you can keep an eye on that, but otherwise our application is available on the city's website. That's all I have. Thank you.
Staff? Anything? I just want to bring up RAGBRAI is coming to town, and we're looking for volunteers. So please get the word out among all those people that you know, asking them to volunteer to help work RAGBRAI. And with that, we'll move on to item 10, which is adjournment, and I will ask for a motion to adjourn and a second.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. We are adjourned until May 22nd. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for your time and consideration. I love this town.